Putin, it seems, has finally decided a war against Europe will begin as early as this spring. Shoigu promises to strike Finland and the Baltic states while Dmitry Medvedev is again hurling threats at the West. The Kremlin's horror stories are spreading across the world. Famine at the front and an American one at that. Aircraft carriers off the coast of the Middle East are running out of food. Russia is building up its forces and preparing a new offensive in Ukraine. As many as 20,000 occupiers will go on the attack at once. Europe's largest nuclear power plant is on the brink of catastrophe. The Zaporizhzhia Nuclear Power Plant has completely lost its external power supply. The skies over Europe are closing. The first Western airlines have begun cutting the number of flights due to fuel shortages. And Russian deputies are declaring war on IVF. Instead of the expensive procedure, Russian women are advised to give themselves to SVO soldiers. We'll talk about this and more next. This is News Today. My name is Yulia Kapitonova. Before we begin, please support our work. To do this, subscribe to the channel and like this video, and also don't forget to leave comments. It's important for us to know your opinion. Putin may decide on a war against Europe as early as this spring. The Washington Post came out with such a sensational headline, and all because the bunker dweller is in a hurry before the window of opportunity closes. The media writes that the Russian army has reached a stalemate in Ukraine. Russia's economy is weakened, and there's almost no chance of victory. That is why the Kremlin may go for a new escalation. We are talking about an attack on one of the Baltic countries to test whether NATO is really ready to defend its allies. If Europe doesn't have time to arm itself and the West, even worse, shows weakness, Putin may decide that there will be no better moment, the Washington Post concludes. It seems it has begun. The Kremlin, despite all warnings, is unleashing a war against NATO. The Secretary of the Security Council of the Russian Federation, Sergei Shoigu, threatens to strike Finland and the Baltic states. The reason for this was Ukrainian UAVs allegedly flying through the territory of these countries to strike Russia. And even though there is no confirmation of this, the Kremlin leadership doesn't need any. Moscow is already stating that it may exercise its right to self-defense, citing Article 51 of the UN Charter. Meanwhile, the internet tough Dmitry Medvedev is again hurling threats at the West. Now, Medvedev's wrath has fallen on Ukraine's partners for supplying drones to Kyiv. The Russian Ministry of Defense echoes Alko Demon. They published the addresses of European drone manufacturers. The Putin regime is once again switching to the language of direct threats.
This is a symptom of the impending strategic defeat of the Russian regime.
And they are doing it for the first time so openly. The perpetually drunk deputy chairman of the Russian Security Council, Medvedev, has threatened European countries with strikes on their territory.
When the possibility of a strike becomes a reality will depend on how the situation develops. Sweet dreams, European partners.
These statements were made following the publication by the Russian Ministry of Defense of a list of enterprises in European countries that Moscow identifies as participants in the production of drones and military equipment for Ukraine.
A significant increase in the production of UAVs for the Kyiv regime is planned through expanded funding for Ukrainian and joint ventures located in European countries that produce attack drones and their components.
The list includes 11 branches. Among them are facilities in the United Kingdom, Latvia, Lithuania, the Netherlands, Poland, and the Czech Republic, as well as Germany, Spain, Italy, Israel, and Turkey.
We view this decision as a deliberate step leading to a sharp escalation of the military-political situation across the entire European continent and the creeping transformation of these countries into Ukraine's strategic rear.
In essence, this is no longer just a warning. It is a public marking of targets that Moscow effectively links to potential strikes.
Russia is rapidly running out of air defenses. Last month, based on video evidence alone, the Russian regime lost 41 units of radar systems, surface-to-air missile systems, and so on. This month, it is losing about 1 unit per day. Before that, 54 units were lost over 3 consecutive months. The air defense crisis is only just beginning.
And against this backdrop, Medvedev's rhetoric looks less and less like a show of strength and more like fear. The fear of a system trying to cover its own vulnerability with threats and harsh language.
At the same time, the Ukrainians are getting more and more drones and missiles, but especially UAVs. Moreover, the quality of these drones has clearly improved. and their range has not decreased, but has even increased once again. Precision was already achieved at a meter-by-meter level a year ago. And since then, as you can imagine, these systems have not started working any worse. On the contrary, they have started working better.
That is why every new round of such statements sounds not like an expansion of influence, but like a signal of an approaching internal fiasco that the Kremlin is trying to hide by any means.
The statement from the Russian Ministry of Defense should be taken quite literally. The publication of production sites for drones and other military equipment in Europe is a registry of potential legitimate targets for the Russian armed forces.
And another step towards pressure. The Russian State Duma approved the so-called Protection of Russians Abroad. A bill was passed in its first reading that allows the Russian leadership to use armed forces outside of Russia, supposedly to protect citizens facing judicial prosecution. Formally, this concerns Russians arrested or prosecuted by decisions of foreign courts and international bodies in which Russia does not participate. However, the key feature of the initiative is its extremely broad wording, with no clear limits on the use of force. Essentially, a mechanism is being created where foreign court decisions can be interpreted as a pretext for a foreign policy and potential military response.
Russia is demonstrating that it's losing ground in this war, generally speaking, at all levels. On the front lines, where the Russian offensive, as the publication Welt writes, for example, has stalled. In the rear, if we're talking about the mid-rear areas, which are burning like they've never burned before, and of course deep within Russian territory, where literally, as I've already said, entire clusters are sometimes burned in a single night, entire clusters of the Russian military-industrial complex.
And the more and the louder threatening statements are made in Russia, the more obvious the main thing becomes. The end is near, which means Ukraine and its Western partners are on the right track. Russia is preparing to strike more often. Ukraine's Foreign Minister Andriy Sybiha stated that Moscow could increase the number of massive attacks to 7 per month. According to him, in the Ukrainian reality, we're talking about at least 400 drones and no fewer than 20 missiles per attack. Such scales became possible thanks to the accumulation of resources and the so-called Easter truce played into the Russians' hands. As the Institute for the Study of War reports, the Russian army was likely stockpiling weapons for subsequent massive attacks on Ukraine. Analysts emphasize that the pause helped Moscow as its tactics are built on resetting and exhausting Ukrainian air defenses. The world's top army is experiencing hunger, and not in terms of ammunition and equipment, but quite literally. American aircraft carriers off the coast of the Middle East are running out of food. Sailors are complaining of hunger and empty trays. This refers to the ships USS Tripoli and USS Abraham Lincoln deployed in the region. According to relatives of the military personnel, crews are receiving reduced portions and sharing food among themselves. There is also a shortage of hygiene products on the ships. As a reminder, the aircraft carrier Tripoli has been at sea for over a month, and other ships significantly longer. Russia is building up its forces and preparing a new offensive in Ukraine. As reported by the Financial Times, citing GUR representative Vadim Skibitsky, the enemy could deploy up to 20,000 additional troops in the country's southeast. We are talking about strategic reserves. Overall, according to intelligence estimates, about 680,000 Russian soldiers are already at the front. The main goal is the complete capture of Donbass by September. In parallel, Russia is ramping up its weapons production. Approximately 60 Iskander missiles are produced per month and capacities continue to expand. But it's not all bad because things are going terribly for the occupiers. Logistics are targeted, there is no longer a safe rear. Thus, all key routes around Donetsk are under the control of Ukrainian Defense Forces drones. This is reported by the 1st Corps of the National Guard Azov. According to them, strike UAVs are now operating not only on the front line but also deep in the rear zone. Zures, Andrivka, Starobesheve, Horlivka, Lysychansk, and the Donetsk Ring Road are under constant surveillance. Such activity, Azov notes, directly points to the weakness of the Russian air control system.
But from now on, all military targets moving along the roads around Donetsk will be destroyed. A safe rear for the occupiers does not exist. It is impossible to hide and protect oneself.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine Today. Join us now.
And while Russia continues to insist on a long war, Ukraine is betting on technological advantage. Fedorov is becoming a significant trump card for Ukraine in the fight against Russian invaders. Thus, Ukraine has implemented a new model of warfare, drone assault units, the Ministry of Defense reported. Such units combine aerial and ground unmanned systems with infantry into a single combat system. The ministry emphasized that the approach has already shown effectiveness in the south, where significant areas have been liberated since February. See the report for details on Fedorov's innovations. Putin's occupiers are in the crosshairs. Ukraine is implementing a new model of warfare. This refers to the creation of drone assault units. The new model combines aerial and ground drones with infantry into a single system, which allows for minimizing personnel losses and increasing strike accuracy.
Today, I honestly just observe what is really a logical and fairly predictable evolution of assault units into something that will, in fact, change the face of future infantry worldwide, not just in Ukraine. Well, at least until the end of this century. Since the infantryman and the unmanned systems that accompany him, reconnaissance surveillance systems, ground robotic complexes, as well as strike weapons, these are an integral part of today's infantry, and this will be integrated specifically into assault units.
It is planned that this experience will be scaled to all key areas of the front, finally solidifying the dominance of unmanned systems in modern warfare strategy. According to the Ministry of Defense, the use of these newest units has already shown concrete successes in southern Ukraine.
At that time, the suppression of Russian positions was carried out in a combined way, using both a drone component and assault units. You could say it was a kind of trial of our capabilities, and it showed results. We not only stopped the Russian advance in the Huliapol direction along the right bank of the Haicho River, as well as in the Vovcha-Vorona interflow, which is already in the Dnipropetrovsk region, but also forced the Russians to the left bank of the Haicho River to pull back, leave their positions, and retreat.
According to Defense Minister Mikhailo Fedorov, every meter of Ukrainian land costs the occupiers a price of enormous human casualties. The introduction of drone assault units, combining unmanned systems with infantry, will allow for much more effective combat against the Russian invaders.
Mikhailo Fedorov is a person who is technically very well, who has a very good technical background. They are technically well informed about exactly what is happening within the troops and fully aware of what the troops genuinely need. At long last, some much-needed fresh blood has finally entered the Ministry of Defense rather than the usual stale, senile pension age or merely temporary appointees. In other words, this is not just the blood of a time server. We are talking about a specific change from within the very concept of the Ministry of Defense and its approach to further decision-making regarding how Ukraine should win this war.
Although Mikhailo Fedorov has only been in the post of defense minister since January, he is actively implementing a technological approach to warfare. On April 15th at a Ramstein format meeting, Fedorov noted that Ukraine's air defense has significantly strengthened. The interception rate for cruise missiles was 80%, and the interception rate for drones exceeded 90%. And this is despite a very difficult winter when the Russian Federation tried to destroy Ukraine's energy sector.
On the night of April 15th to the 16th, we actually witnessed with our own eyes how our air defense systems effectively and skillfully handled practically most of the incoming targets. The short-range air defense units managed to shoot down the maximum possible number of enemy drones. Medium-range air defense, including our aviation, F-16 fighters and MiG-29, shot down Kh-101 missiles, and 19 out of 20 missiles were shot down. That is a practically absolute indicator of efficiency, but we still have problems with ballistics.
The Ukraine Defense Contact Group during the Ramstein meeting agreed on air defense support for the country and the supply of missiles for Patriot systems. Also, Germany is investing $4 billion in strengthening air defense. The United Kingdom is providing the largest drone support package this year. Estonia is joining the air defense reinforcement under the PRL program.
This is primarily about strengthening the capabilities of Ukraine's defense forces in conducting both counteroffensive operations and accordingly so-called active defense. But also particularly noteworthy and significant is the recent statement by the NATO head that the country will receive military support from our European partners worth about 60 billion euros.
Protecting the Ukrainian sky has become not just a security issue, but a powerful impetus for the development of the defense industrial complex and communication with European partners.
Not just at the level of supply us with Patriot system launches, supply us with PAC-3 type surface-to-air missiles for Patriot air defense systems, but let's also communicate at the level of creating our own air defense system. This should be inexpensive and affordable, yet still high-tech and fully functional when it comes to intercepting ballistic missiles.
According to Bloomberg estimates, Ukraine has already turned into one of Europe's largest sites for combat testing of drones. New solutions are tested right on the battlefield, and successful developments are immediately launched into large-scale production. Europe's largest nuclear power plant is again on the brink of catastrophe. The Zaporizhzhia Nuclear Power Plant has completely lost its external power supply. As reported by the head of the IAEA, Rafael Grossi, this is already the second such case in less than a week and the 14th since the start of the full-scale war. The sky over Europe is closing. The first Western airlines have begun to reduce the number of flights, and all because of a fuel shortage. For instance, the German Lufthansa stated that it will suspend flights of 27 aircraft in the near future. Also, the national carrier of the Netherlands will cancel at least 160 flights over the next month to and from Amsterdam Airport. At the same time, the French have already announced an increase in ticket prices. And the British Virgin Atlantic has introduced an additional fuel surcharge. The head of the Russian State Duma Committee on Family Issues announced a fight against IVF for single women.
Instead of spending money on expensive IVF procedures, Nina Ostanina advised Russian women to take a closer look at the special military operation participants. The official is certain that if a child is raised only by a mother, it will subsequently affect their socialization. The Russian Federation is allegedly already feeling the fruits of female upbringing. These are effeminate men with a feminist touch. Furthermore, a lack of will and backbone, Ostanina is sure, is all a result of female upbringing. It is worth noting that the head of the Russian State Duma Committee on Family Issues herself raised 2 sons with her husband. One of them in 2012 was sentenced to 12.5 years in a maximum security colony for the murder of his business partner. And this woman is still going to teach others how to raise children. Meanwhile, the demand for IVF over the last 4 years in Russia has grown by 50%, and some women are increasingly deciding to give birth for themselves. Russians are packing their bags and fleeing in panic toward the border. Moreover, they are ready to go anywhere as long as it is far away from Putin. Thus, Russians are fleeing to Belarus en masse due to internet blocks. The number of search queries on Google and Yandex for housing, Belarusian residency permits, and local SIM cards is at a record high for at least 5 years, as Verska accurately noted. According to their data, the peak of Russian interest in Belarus occurred in March. Among the advantages of living with Batka, Russians cite reasonable prices and the operation of popular internet applications without a VPN. And soon living in Belarus will become even better and more pleasant. And all because Ukraine is undermining the legs of the throne of the Belarusian dictator Lukashenko. Together with a powerful opposition, Kyiv is working on the task of changing the Minsk authorities, since only a peace-loving and civilized neighbor, not dancing to Putin's tune, will give Kyiv confidence that there will be no attack from Belarus again.
Ukraine is changing its strategy regarding Belarus. Now, Kyiv will not wait for the situation in Minsk to change on its own and is starting to act.
We need to mobilize now to survive this difficult time, and an uncertain time at that. As president, I do not know what to prepare you for.
It should be noted that Ukraine does not intend to directly interfere in the politics of the neighboring state, but it will much more actively show its interest in Belarus no longer being Moscow's doormat. A clear testament to that was the meeting between Zelensky and the Belarusian oppositionist Sviatlana Tsikhanouskaya, as well as the appointment of a representative for Belarus in Ukraine.
We have a huge number of topics with Ukraine. This is the information war against Russian propaganda and aid to Belarusian volunteers who are now defending Ukraine. This includes countering Lukashenko's provocations as well. We have a huge amount of information from inside Belarus about the Russian military presence, Oreshniks, and nuclear weapons. And we will be sharing this information, whether it's intelligence or secret.
Moreover, Europe also intends to deal with the Belarusian issue more actively. First of all, experts explain because Lukashenko's actions and rhetoric pose real threats to the European Union.
There can be no peacetime, Pavel. It's just not possible. We are preparing for war.
Deployment of Oreshnik, transfer of Russian troops, construction of new military facilities, these are just the most obvious paths of escalation that Minsk is pursuing today. The threat is also growing for Ukraine at the same time.
In Belarus, military special launchers are being created for drones, Russian drones over the territory of Ukraine, so that the range would be shortened as well as the flight duration.
In addition, according to intelligence from Russia, Putin wants to create a buffer zone around Ukraine not only in the east but also in the north. And this means that the invasion from Belarus could happen again.
In order to organize a buffer zone, Putin needs to do a few things. First, relatively speaking, this is the first such option, is to directly send Russian troops to the territory of Belarus, then use Russian troops to enter the territory of Ukraine. That is to use Belarus again as a bridgehead against the Ukrainian state, just as it was at the beginning of the full-scale invasion.
Realizing that Putin might drag him into the war any moment, the mustachioed one even started a military review. All for one thing, to declare his own army not combat ready.
It was covered the way perhaps most of you would have liked, because all the filth that is in our army, and there's plenty of it, well, I wouldn't want to show it primarily to our potential adversaries, maybe even enemies.
At the same time, although Lukashenko evaded direct military aid to Moscow, today cooperation with Russia is gaining momentum. As of the end of last year, almost 300 enterprises were working for the Russian defense industry. Minsk also approved a lot of logistical routes that work against Ukraine. Partly, the mustachioed cartographer did this just to stay in office.
Lukashenko is in such a bind right now, you know? You can see he's on edge. You can see he's freaking out, and he doesn't know which way, from which side to expect a blow at all. And the situation with the population inside is also static, but it's tense.
Both Kyiv and Europe decided to take advantage of this, mainly through contacts with the opposition, which is increasing its network and influence inside Belarus.
After all, Lukashenko is getting older. Lukashenko has no support base in Belarus. Society doesn't support the war, doesn't support integration with Russia. We feel this, we see it, including through the repressions, because every day people are detained for anti-war or anti-Lukashenko actions or even online activities. And all of this could create a new situation that we must be prepared for, whether it's internal shifts within the system itself or perhaps something related to the streets. We can't predict exactly which scenarios because everything depends on the geopolitical situation.
As for Lukashenko, he understands everything too. A regime that for the last 5 years has relied solely on Putin's bayonets cannot exist indefinitely. And all that remains for the mustachioed one today is to visit factories and fish farms, as befits a supply manager.
This shows once again that he is in a very difficult psychological state. He is indeed preparing for the worst-case scenarios. He is responsible for these worst-case scenarios because he made Belarus dependent on the aggressor country. He has led the economy of our country to a dismal state.
And most importantly, he has put himself in the same position. After all, the pressure from Russia and the EU is tightening, and any moment now it might crush the dictator who has sat on his throne longer than anyone in Europe.
That's all from me for now. Next, I'm handing over the information relay to my colleagues. They are already preparing the latest news for you. In the meantime, support us with 3 simple actions: like, subscribe, and comment. See you.